This is a song that calls all of our people out from all of the islands. It is an invitation. He kono la, it is an invitation to all to come together and to declare your loyalty to the kingdom and to the queen. Kaulana na pua o Hawai'i, kupa ama hope o kaina, ki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, palapala anu me ka paka.
Three speakers tonight who have, each of whom has spent many years researching, discussing with our community, with other legal scholars about the issue of sovereignty, the Hawaiian quest for international and national recognition of our self-determination and sovereignty. I want to give a fuller introduction to each of the speakers. Professor Williamson Chang has taught at the law school. I think he's now the longest serving professor on our faculty. He served as a special deputy attorney general representing Chief Justice Richardson in the federal courts with regard to some of the primary cases in Hawaii related to water and land rights. He was also helped to found the Native Hawaiian Council for Advisory Council, and served as its litigation director. Among the many courses that he has taught, business associations, indigenous peoples law, Native Hawaiian rights, and water resources. He will be teaching Hawaiian legal history in the fall. This is a call out to students. He will be teaching Hawaiian legal history in the fall, and I highly recommend his course. Professor Chang is currently working on a book, Aropa's Sand, the United States Annexation of Hawaii, which is an account of the actual history of the United States acquisition of Hawaii. Professor Williamson Chang.
Aloha.
Aloha. Aloha.
You have a handout. This is my handout. If you don't have a handout, I have. Let's see. It's a handout that's titled Truth and Reconciliation, a State of Emergency. And I only have 20 minutes to speak. I usually have 75, so this is going to be hard for me. I'm going to make one big point so that you remember it, and I'm telling you this is a good point. And it's one to remember. It's like not like an emergency, it's like a hand grenade. I'm going to give you the pin to the hand grenade. You pull the pin, everything blows up. So don't pull the pin. But the hand grenade is the power of the United States over the Hawaiian Islands and the jurisdiction of the United States in the state of Hawaii by its own admissions, by its own laws, doesn't exist. And so that means that ever since the 1898 annexation of Hawaii by a joint resolution, they say, we have been living a myth. And you say, yeah, I knew that. But you didn't know how bad it was. And you go, state of emergency, everything looks fine to me. I don't hear the fire trucks. I don't see the sirens. It is a state of emergency. In other words, if there's no power to govern, the only legal power is an extraordinary power that governments have. It's used only by military juntas and other governments to govern, which is a state of emergency. If you don't have legal power over a territory, you're governing without jurisdiction. And if you look down to the bottom of the first page, that's what I'm saying. It's an admission by the United States. So far, you've probably heard that there's been no treaty. That's correct. There's no treaty between the United States and Hawaii by which Hawaii was acquired by the United States. You probably heard the argument that the United States makes, which is Hawaii was acquired by a joint resolution. But now I'm going to deal with that. A joint resolution, as an act of Congress, cannot acquire another country. It's merely a bill. It's merely an act of one Congress, one legislature, one parliament. If the United States Congress could acquire Hawaii, then the House of Nobles and the Legislative Assembly of Hawaii could acquire the United States. If two sovereigns are equal, they're equal means they're equal. One cannot acquire the other by its laws. It could do so perhaps by military might, but that's not what the United States claims. It does not claim to take Hawaii by military force. So, to give you an example of this, I want you to look on page 3, Appendix A of the Joint Resolution, and I'll read to you portions from the first 2 paragraphs. This is what acquired Hawaii in the legal minds of the United States, of Justice Scalia, Justice Harlan, 100 years of the United States Supreme Court jurisprudence. This statement alone acquired Hawaii. Whereas the government of the Republic of Hawaii, having in due form signified its consent in the manner provided by its Constitution to cede absolutely and without reserve to the United States all rights of sovereignty of whatsoever kind in and over the Hawaiian Islands, and also to cede and transfer to the United States the absolute fee and ownership of all public government or crown lands. Did you hear the 2 phrases? One was to give all sovereignty, the power over things. The other was to give all public property, lands, and buildings. So 2 things have been given under this whereas clause. Whereas it goes on, and then at the bottom of that paragraph, it says therefore. Therefore resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that said session accepted, ratified, and confirmed. Powerful, huh? Yeah. No. Powerful in your imagination. But it's me, like me, pointing to Christian Smith and saying, whereas you love me, and in due form have signified your wish to marry me, I duly accept. Therefore we're married. Did she say anything? No. Did Hawaii say anything? No. This is written by the United States. The United States says, whereas you want to give everything to me, I'll take it. That's the basis by which the United States claims have this territorial sovereignty, and what else? 2 things, remember. They took the sovereignty, that's power over the land, and they took the ceded lands and all public buildings. So what's in jeopardy if we don't believe that this government document was a cession of all property and sovereignty? Never been taken. Okay, that is enough. That's what you probably already know. What I want to point out to you, probably for maybe your first time, is that in the act of admission, when Hawaii was admitted as a state, the act of admission itself excludes the Hawaiian Islands from the state of Hawaii. It does. In Congress's own words, it says the Hawaiian Islands does not, Hawaii state does not include the Hawaiian Islands. So I want you to turn to page 2. Section 2 of the Act of Admission, written by Congress, 1953 and 1954. Section 2, if you're with me, on the top of page 2. It says, the state of Hawaii shall consist of all the islands, together with their appurtenant reefs and territorial waters, included in the territory of Hawaii on the date of enactment of this act, except the atoll known as Palmer Island, together with its appurtenant reefs and territorial waters. But said state shall not be deemed to include Midway Islands, Johnston Island, Sand Island, or Kingman Reef. What do you notice about that? They don't tell you what islands are in the state of Hawaii. They tell you what islands are not in the state of Hawaii. And Midway never was in the state of Hawaii. Johnston wasn't, Sand wasn't, Palmyra was. But who knows what Palmyra is? Why not put in Oahu, Maui, Ko'olawe, Kauai, Lanai? There's a reason. The reason is they couldn't. If Congress cannot, by joint resolution in 1898, acquire Hawaii unilaterally, it cannot do so in 1959. So what they try to do is fool you, and they have fooled us. I was fooled. I was fooled, I admit it, 25 years ago. The state of Hawaii shall consist of all the islands together with their pertinent reefs included in the territory. So we have to look to see what was included in the territory. And what was included in the territory is set forth in section 2 in the middle of the page, page 2. And this was written in 1900. It's an act of Congress again. Territory of Hawaii. That the islands acquired by the United States of America under an act of Congress entitled Joint Resolution to provide for annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the United States, approved July 7, 1898, shall be known as the territory of Hawaii. They left out Oahu again. They're not telling you what's in the territory of Hawaii. Just that they're not throwing in Midway, at least they didn't do that. But what islands are in the territory of Hawaii? Those acquired by the joint resolution. So only the islands acquired by the joint resolution are in the territory, and if that island is in the territory, then it's in the state. So since we've proven that no island could be acquired by a joint resolution, and the United States has, in many ways, literally admitted that, if there's nothing in the territory of Hawaii, there's nothing in the state of Hawaii. And this is the Congressional Acts of 1900 and 1959. So in short, by the United States' own hand, it admits that it didn't acquire the Hawaiian Islands. And all those Hawaiians who have been saying the United States doesn't have jurisdiction have been right.
Right.
And you know why this works? It's because of the Kuwait petitions. The Kuwait petitions said, 21,000 Hawaiians said, we don't want to be annexed. We don't want a treaty of annexation to go through. If the treaty of annexation had gone through, then it would be over. We wouldn't be able to meet like this. We wouldn't have this ammunition. What country can rest upon its own admission that it didn't acquire another territory and say for 100 years, we don't have to do anything for you? They're ruling by what? By force. Not by de jure jurisdiction, not by de facto jurisdiction, but by practical control under their own definitions. So what am I telling you? I'm telling you that you have the strongest ammunition before we start our debates and discussions of alternative approaches and alternative visions to Hawaiian sovereignty, that this is the biggest leverage that one has in terms of negotiating with the United States. They have to come to us. Only Pakistan, Nigeria, military juntas do this. That is, impose their will over a people and territory without the consent of the people or without an act by which they actually acquire the territory. I want to leave you with one last thing, which is that, as you probably know, in the 1950s, Hawaii was on the list of non-self-governing territories as listed by the United Nations. And we were delisted from that list because they say that in 1959, there was a plebiscite by which 94% of the people of Hawaii, which includes a lot of Hawaiians, except the Hawaiians and Niihau, agreed that we should become a state. But that plebiscite has been protested as fraudulent and misleading and not in keeping with international law, that it did not involve an option for independence. I want you to look at the last page, page 4. And I want you to note that there were 3 questions in Appendix D. There were 3 questions in Appendix D in the plebiscite. The first was, shall Hawaii be admitted as a state, immediately into the Union as a state? Everybody understood that. Question 2 was more important to the United States. Do you approve the new boundaries of the state as fixed by the Statehood Bill? Those boundaries I read to you, those funny boundaries where they throw out Midway and they don't put in Oahu, it took 5 years to write. It took 5 years to write something that would fool all of us for 100 years. And fool the courts, and fool the judges, and fool the lawyers. That was what they were looking for.
Let's be complete here.
No, well, I gotta admit, it was pretty shifty. But it didn't violate the law. It didn't acquire Hawaii. So Hawaii has never been acquired. But number two was more important because in the proposed Constitution of the 1949 Constitutional Convention that met to design a constitution for the state of Hawaii, they said that they wanted a state of Hawaii that included what was known as the state of Hawaii. And when that got to Congress, that blew their mind. You don't know what is in Hawaii? No, the delegates from Hawaii said, we don't really know. And then the senators began to realize that Hawaii had never been actually acquired. And this was during the Cold War. You couldn't admit to the rest of the world that Hawaii had been annexed without a treaty. And so I tracked the record, the senator from New Mexico, who was the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Insular Affairs, who sat and supervised the writing of that language. And they went through 6 drafts to get to that. It looks good, it's empty. There's nothing in the state of Hawaii. No, I would say I get paid by the state of Hawaii, so there's got to be something in the state of Hawaii. But it's a very small state. And so the point of the plebiscite was, do you approve of the new boundaries as fixed by the statehood bill? The new boundaries were the ones the federal government wrote, and they'd never explained to the people of Hawaii what this was about. They said it's a mere technicality. Don't worry about it. Just vote for statehood. So the vote for statehood was a vote which was self-contradictory. We want to be admitted into the Union, but not Oahu, and not Molokai, and not Maui. That's not admission. And so that plebiscite by which we were taken off the list of non-self-governing territories should be rescinded. In fact, people are trying to rescind it now on the grounds that it did not include the option of independence. But it itself is misleading, and the people were never explained the importance of question 2. So, the ammunition that we all admit that nothing can be achieved without the United States going along with it. That's the 900-pound elephant in the room. But we have to come in with the best leverage we have. And the best leverage we have is 100 years of being lied to, being misrepresented, being told that we were part of the United States, and that has been legally false. Thank you very much. Aloha kika.
Thank you, Professor Chang. I'm going to call up Dr. Keanu Sai now to give a presentation. As you know, Dr. Sai received his PhD in political science from the University of Hawaii at Manoa Department of Political Science with his dissertation titled The American Occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Beginning the Transition from Occupied to Restored State. He lectures and teaches on the illegal and prolonged occupation of Hawaii. He's an expert on Hawaiian constitutional law, state sovereignty, and the international law of occupation. He recently published a new book, Uamau Sovereignty Endures, on the legal and political history of the Hawaiian Kingdom that spans from Kamehameha I till today. Dr. Keanu Sai.
Aloha. Okay, well, my name is Keanu, and I guess I'm here to provide a historical analysis. I don't want to say perspective, but a historical analysis that applies law and politics to what happened to Hawaii and bring it to date. What I want to bring to the conversation here is international law and not just US law, but it also includes Hawaiian law. And these 3 types of laws work together in what we call, in political science and law, occupation, which explains the phenomenon where one state has its authority unlawfully in the territory of another state. Okay. So, I'm still adjusting with my internal clock. About 3 weeks ago, I was in Geneva for 1 week, which is 11-hour difference. Then I came home for 1 week. Then I headed off to the East Coast for guest lectures at a few universities, which was 6 hours difference. So I'm slowly waking up in the morning from 2 o'clock, and I just woke up this morning at 4:30, so I'm slowly getting back to the Hawaii time. Okay, so Hawaii, an independent state under an American and prolonged occupation. Okay, now when I speak of independence, okay, independence is political. And you acquire political independence by recognition, okay? And once recognized as an independent state, what has happened is, through a political act with legal ramifications, a subject of law was just given birth. That's why countries celebrate Independence Day. That is the birth of their country into the family of nations, okay? Now, independence being political is synonymous with sovereignty, which is supreme authority over your territory, to the exclusion of other sovereignties over their territory. So to kind of just touch upon very briefly with Professor Chang's statement that in the Statehood Act, there is no mention of the islands. That is very important when you're talking jurisdiction, because you need boundaries. Those boundaries is called territorial jurisdiction, okay? And that's very important, okay? So the Hawaiian Kingdom had 16 islands that made up its territory that was fully recognized, okay? So I just want to kind of get that idea where you're independent. It just doesn't vanish, okay? It has to go somewhere. And that's where we get into international law called successor state. So the United States has to be considered a successor state if in fact they got Hawaii sovereignty by a treaty, okay? Otherwise, Hawaii sovereignty would remain intact. Now, without a treaty, the United States has enacted internal laws by its Congress imposed in Hawaii. It included the 1898 Joint Resolution, the 1900 Organic Act, which created the government for the territory of Hawaii, the 1959 Statehood Act, which wasn't really an admission of Hawaii into the Union. Okay, you gotta watch the play on words there. Because Hawaii was already a part of the United States, supposedly as an insular possession. When you say admitted into the Union, it's almost implying that 1959 is when Hawaii joined the United States. It actually, all it did was change its status from a territorial government into a state. And also the 1993 Joint Resolution of Apology, where the Congress apologized for the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. What I want to make a point of distinction here is there's a big difference between the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state and the government that exercises that authority. This was an overthrow of the government, not the state. Because you can overthrow a government without overthrowing the country. An example of that would be 2003, Iraq, which was its government militarily annihilated by the United States, but that overthrow of its government and Saddam Hussein's government did not overthrow Iraq as a country. It was still independent. But it's called occupied. Okay, that's the term that's used. Now, what are the limitations of national laws of the United States? Well, let's point to the United States Supreme Court and let them explain that to us. In U.S. v. Curtis Wright, in 1936, the Supreme Court stated, neither the Constitution nor the laws passed in pursuance of it have any force in foreign territory, and operations of the nation in such territory must be governed by treaties, international understandings, and compacts, and the principles of international law. So all these laws that I pointed out to you that were passed by Congress, according to the United States Supreme Court, it has no effect in foreign territory. So again, going back to Professor Chang, a joint resolution, if it's limited to U.S. territory, it can be considered as an act that acquired a foreign territory. Now, the United States Supreme Court's decision here was merely a reiteration of an international court's decision, the Permanent Court of International Justice in 1927. The court stated that now the first and foremost restriction imposed by international law upon a state. And when I use state, or when state is used here, it means country. Yeah. Upon a state is that it may not exercise its power in any form in the territory of another state. In this sense, jurisdiction is certainly territorial. It cannot be exercised by a state outside of its territory except by virtue of a permissive rule derived from international custom or from a convention or treaty. Okay. So you can see where the problem lies. Yeah? It's not just there's no treaty. The United States cannot annex a foreign country by passing a law, period. But the point is, Hawaii had to be a country in order for these international laws to apply. If Hawaii was a non-self-governing territory, that's not a country. That's a country that wants to become a country or a state through what is called self-determination. Okay? So we have to understand that these laws would only apply to an established country or state, not a territory who aspires to become independent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what were they saying back then in 1900? Because here we finally realized there's no treaty, but nobody was talking about that, I would say, 20 years ago. Yeah? It wasn't even on the radar. It wasn't an issue. Well, this is the Maui News, 1900. Still exists today. And this Maui News, published out of Wailuku, it has this guy right here, G.B. Robertson, the editor. He's an enemy of the state. Notice how I use that word, enemy of the state. He's an insurgent. An insurgent that President Cleveland asked the Queen to grant amnesty to, a pardon. Because if she didn't, and they were convicted, they get executed because they committed treason. But he's an enemy of the state because the Queen, the government was not restored, therefore she could not carry out the pardon. So let's see what this guy says. And it's centering on this person named Thomas Clark. Okay. So G.B. Robertson says, Thomas Clark, a candidate for territorial senator from Maui, holds that it was an unconstitutional proceeding on the part of the United States to annex the islands without a treaty. And that as a matter of fact, the islands are not annexed and cannot be. And that if the Democrats come into power, they will show the thing up in its true light and demonstrate that the islands are de facto independent at the present time. Now that's 2 years after so-called annexation. That's not today. Yeah? We're just recovering our memory and realizing that's what they already knew. Now he goes on to say, Thomas, necessity knows no law. Okay? And this guy's going to start talking like he's from the U.S. State Department. Let's keep in mind he's from Wailuku, Maui, and his name is G.B. Robertson. Thomas, necessity knows no law, and it was absolutely necessary to annex the islands at the time it was done. And further, Thomas, if it becomes necessary to annex Cuba, it would be done quicker than a wink. Pretty affirmative, yeah? It is but fair to give you credit for being honest in your views, Thomas, but you don't quite understand the American people just yet, hence you're very misleading. What does that have to do with no treaty? Nothing. It's called spinning. Now, who is Thomas Clark? There are two things that resonate from this article. One, he knows there was no treaty. How would he know there's no treaty? Well, Thomas Clark was one of the signatures on the Ku'e petition in Wailuku. He was 46 years old when he signed it. And he says here, another thing pointed out, that he doesn't know or understand the American people, implying he's not American. Actually, Thomas Clark was British, naturalized in the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1867, and lived in Wailuku, Maui. He was a Hawaiian subject. Interesting how this all plays out when you start to look into our history through the proper, as we say in the academy, theoretical framework. So we need propaganda that there's a treaty. Because the one thing that we can speak affirmatively in us believing that there's a treaty is the fact that we say ceded lands. Because the word cede, C-D-E-E, C-E-D-E, comes from the word cession. Cession is to transfer from one country to another. The evidence of the transfer is a treaty. That's the definition of it. You can look up cede in the dictionary. You need a treaty. So because we say ceded lands, it implies there's a treaty. But yet clearly, there was no treaty. Propaganda. Here's a U.S. Supreme Court case, 1906, an appeal from Hawaii, Lowry versus Hawaii. And in that decision, it specifically says that the property described in the petition, having been transferred and ceded to the United States by the Treaty of Annexation of July 7, 1898. That's not true, because that wasn't a treaty on July 7, 1898. That was a joint resolution of annexation. So even the U.S. Supreme Court knows you can't annex a foreign country by passing a law, so let's call it a treaty. And here's another example of propaganda. 1901, excuse me. History of the U.S. State Department, Government Printing Office. There's a section on Hawaii. A treaty was negotiated by Secretary Foster, agreed upon by both parties, and sent to the Senate by President Harrison, February 14, 1893. That's true, which was part of the conspiracy to land U.S. troops to intervene in order to allow Lawrence Thurston, an enemy of the state, to travel to Washington to sign a treaty with President Harrison, transferring all of Hawaii to the United States. The treaty was withdrawn by President Cleveland. That's true, because President Cleveland came into office on March 4th, 1893, who did the investigation, concluded it was illegal, and entered into 2 executive agreements to restore the government and requesting the Queen to grant amnesty. Those executive agreements were never carried out for political reasons taking place at the Congress, in particular with Senator Morgan. Then it says President McKinley, the 3rd president, revived the question and a treaty was ratified by both parties. No. Okay. And here's a local propaganda, McKinley High School.
We need to rip off that arm, honor him appropriately.
What's interesting is the insurgents are in control of the territorial government. In fact, who is heading the territorial government? The lead insurgent, Bob Dole. Sanford. So many Doles.
One pineapple you get distinguished.
So these insurgents who are in the territorial government have to continue the propaganda. So what they do is they start to change schools, which are public schools that belong to the Hawaiian Kingdom. Because remember, I forgot to state that the governmental infrastructure that the territorial government was claiming was actually the governmental infrastructure of the Hawaiian Kingdom. All they did was change the head, military backing, and get everybody to sign oaths of allegiance, and then name change. So you might say the Hawaiian Kingdom was the Porsche, but slowly it was painted from brown to red, white, and blue. But it's still a Porsche, still the same car. So they went ahead and changed the names of these schools after U.S. presidents. Thomas Jefferson Elementary, Abraham Lincoln Elementary, Theodore Roosevelt High School, and McKinley High School. McKinley High School used to be called Honolulu High School. It was changed in 1911. And this statue was dedicated in 1911 by Sanford Dole, the lead insurgent. And I heard that there was something on William McKinley's statue. He was holding something in his right hand, which is the document of annexation. And this was back in, 1997. I used to be on a radio show with Keomiki Okui called Perspectives. And Keomiki is a graduate of McKinley. I said, hey, Keomiki, you know what's on that statue? He said, no, I don't know. I said, I heard there's something there that's not true. So I went there and climbed up after I asked the security guard. I climbed up and I took a picture. So I wanted to see what exactly is there. So here's the document of annexation. Here's his fingers. The sun is straight up. This is at noon, lunchtime. Let me highlight for you what actually is engraved on that document. Treaty of Annexation. That's not true. So can you see how important a treaty is? Yeah? We're just realizing the importance of a treaty. They knew the importance of the lack of a treaty. Yeah? Well, how is it that we didn't know? Because when we're talking about the Hawaiian Kingdom, I'm talking about my great-grandparents, okay, my tutu's mom and dad were born in 1880. My great-grandfather, William Kuakini Samerson, was 13 years old with the overthrow of the government. Why is it I know nothing about my great-grandparents? I knew nothing about the Hawaiian Kingdom. When I was at Kamehameha schools, all I learned about was how the missionaries took over, and now we got Hawaiian homes. I'm just joking. I gotta throw some, humor in this. But to tell the truth, I didn't know. Right? But it never was a question for me because it never was an issue. When it becomes an issue, you start asking questions. Now I know why I don't know. And it's all part of the scholarship and research that is currently taking place here at the University of Hawaii. So what I'm sharing with you is not just my personal PowerPoint. This is what is being taught at the university at this stage right now. Okay. Well, in 1906, the territorial government printed the program for patriotic exercises in the public schools. The theme of the program was to indoctrinate the children of the Hawaiian Islands to be American and to speak English. Harper's Weekly magazine came to Hawaii to do a story on this in 1907, and they visited Ka'iolani Public School, Ka'ahumanu Public School, and Honolulu High School before it was changed to McKinley. And here is a picture of 614 school children, which is my grandparents' generation, saluting the flag like Nazis. You notice that? That's actually the type of salute called the Roman salute that was done before World War II. Then they started to change it, put your hand over the heart. Actually, everybody throughout America would salute that way. It wasn't a bad thing. But that's how you salute, you point toward the flag. And what's inscribed on the bottom, it says all the children would recite in unison. We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag. This scene shows the salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Ka'iolani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. How would they pull that out? Because they seized Hawaii as a military outpost to protect Hawaii's west coast from invasion by the rising power of Japan. That's what was the problem. This drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. I find very interesting the term inculcate, because inculcate is to indoctrinate through repetition. Wow, that's pretty blatant. I'm shocked when I'm looking at this, but at the same time, it's giving me a reason as to why I didn't know. So by the time it gets to my parents, and they're in school, it's already institutionalized. Yeah? By the time it came to me, hey, I'm ready to join the Army because that's what I wanted to do. And I actually loved it until I found out I was in the wrong Army. More brainwashing. Speak English, the language of America. Now when you start to talk about Hawaii as a country, as an independent state, through what is called occupation and the laws of occupation, this is evidence of what we call war crimes. It's called attempts to denationalize inhabitants of occupied territories. The population in 1890 was 89,000. By 1950, it exploded to 499,000. Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, number 4, states that the occupying power shall not transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, because it's a war crime. Now what complicates things even more, my great-grandfather from Tennessee, Charles Reeves, came to Hawaii during that time. He didn't know Hawaii was occupied, but yet it's a war crime. So now you see how complicated things are going to start to get. Yeah? So I'm not one here to cast blame. We're here to explain, yeah? The history, explain to us what happened. One thing we learned in the Army, the practical value of history is that it's a film of the past run through the projector of today onto the screen of tomorrow. I'm talking to you about film right now, and I need you to update your projector. Don't come to conclusions. One thing in the Army which you relied on, it's called intel. Intel informs the decision-making process. If you're a civilian, it's called due diligence. Same concept. Now, usurpation of sovereignty and denationalizing inhabitants are collectively known as Americanization. That's the term that would apply. That's the legal term. That type of a term was also applied during the Nuremberg trials. This is the indictment for the Nuremberg trials, prosecuting Nazis. Count 3, war crimes. Germanization of occupied territories. In certain occupied territories purportedly annexed to Germany, the defendants methodically and pursuant to plan endeavored to assimilate those territories politically, culturally, socially, and economically into the German Reich. The defendants endeavored to obliterate the former national character of these territories. In pursuance of these plans and endeavors, the defendants forcibly deported inhabitants who were predominantly non-German and introduced thousands of German colonists. This plan included economic domination, physical conquest, installation of puppet governments, purported de jure or lawful annexation, and enforced conscription or drafting into the German armed forces. This was carried out in most of the occupied countries, including Norway, France, Luxembourg, the Soviet Union, Denmark, Belgium, and Holland. When you read that, it does resonate a lot of similarities with Hawaii at the turn of the century. We're not talking now. We're talking early 1900s. Brainwashing through Americanization. This is what we're taught. Hawaii was annexed by a treaty. That's why we say ceded lands. And became a territory of the United States with a territorial government since 1898. Hawaii became the 50th state of the Federal Union in 1959. So we're told. Native Hawaiians are indigenous people of the United States with the right to self-determination as a nation within a nation, implying Native Hawaiians were never part of a country that was already independent, that they can choose their own, similar to Native American status. That wouldn't apply if Hawaii is occupied, because it's all false. It's all false. So that's what international law does in interpreting these issues that could not be interpreted otherwise with U.S. national laws. If anything, U.S. national laws are the evidence of the violation and not the evidence of U.S. sovereignty. The tables have turned. Really what happened is, it's called military occupation. That was the purpose of Seize Hawaii in 1893. And it all stemmed from people who were following Captain Alfred Mahan of the U.S. Naval War College, who changed the doctrine on the U.S. Navy. Create a large Navy, protect sea lanes, and take the fight outside of America, do not allow it to come in. In order to have a large Navy, you need ports. What came into the eyes of the administration in the 1890s, Pearl Harbor, Pago Pago, Subic Bay. The problem is Subic Bay belonged to the Spanish. Those were Spanish colonies. Pearl Harbor belonged to the Hawaiian Kingdom. And Pago Pago collectively could be claimed by Germany, Great Britain, and the United States, which wasn't resolved until 1900, where they divided the line between Western Samoa and American Samoa. And these are all the bases that are in Hawaii. Now for myself, being a former officer, I knew there were a lot of military here. I just thought, yeah, well, let's talk military. Now when you bring in this perspective, it kind of throws you off. Because you start to think, wow, that's a lot of military here. Because of the military here, Hawaii is also targeted for nuclear strikes. These are 6 targets identified on the island of Oahu by FEMA in 1990. FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. They identified 6 targets. They obviously are not targeting UH Law School. They are not targeting Waikiki. They are targeting the military installations, because that is what is called, if you're at war, you take a preemptive hit. I completely understand that, because if I was in the Army, that's exactly what I would do. Hit first before they hit you, which is exactly what happened Pearl Harbor. A lot of people don't realize that it wasn't just the USS Arizona and the US ships that were hit. You also had civilians on the outskirts of Pearl Harbor. In this case, this is a civilian car. And that wasn't hit by Japanese bombers. That was hit through rounds being fired from anti-aircraft guns from Pearl Harbor, because what goes up comes down. Back then, this is conventional warfare. Today, we're talking nuclear, biological, and chemical. When I was in the Army, when you see nuclear weapon and targeting, that's called no-go terrain. And no-go terrain means no-go forever. So if Hawaii's Oahu gets hit, it's dead. And that is the seat of the most populated island here in Hawaii. Currently, Hawaii has 1.3 million people who don't know this. There are currently 118 military sites that amount to 230,000 acres, which is 20% of the islands. The Russian Federation, China, and North Korea currently have these military installations targeted for nuclear strike and conventional strike. Now, some people might say, well, there's an air defense system here, Barking Sands, intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. They can take them. Okay, what people don't realize is Russia has a Pacific fleet at Vladivostok. Okay, Vladivostok is North Pacific. You have submarines. Submarines launch missiles from underwater. They got what America got. So that should not make you feel comfortable, but I'm just letting you know, this is just a historical narrative of Hawaii. And the tension now between the Russian Federation and the United States resulting from the Crimean incident has drastically risen the potential future attack on Hawaiian territory. It's not because of us, it's because of military. So when we talk about sovereignty, state sovereignty and government, we need to again separate the two, as I mentioned earlier. Sovereignty for Hawaii as a sovereign and independent state was recognized November 28, 1843. And that day, November 28th, in the kingdom is Independence Day. La Kuokoa. They celebrated that. In fact, 1893 was supposed to have been the 50th anniversary of independence, and great celebration was planned, if you read the newspapers. But again, a lot of us don't read the newspapers because most of them are written in Hawaiian, because we're taught to speak English. Yeah.
Curable.
Absolutely curable. Coming from a Hawaiian language professor right here.
You can fix that.
Now, sovereignty, which is authority, is abstract. Yeah? It's abstract. It's authority. Exclusive authority. It has to be exercised by a government. So the government is the organ by which sovereignty is exercised. Okay? So that's why you need to separate the two, because a government can be overthrown without overthrowing the sovereignty. That is what happened in 1893. It wasn't the overthrow of the kingdom, it was an overthrow of the government. Yeah? And that was illegal as determined by the US president in his investigation, which was an executive matter. Through mediation with the Queen, settled it with executive agreements, which were never carried out. So what do you call this situation? You can't explain it through US federal law, because US federal law, no matter what the law is limited to US territory. So they don't entertain any idea of occupation other than what took place during the Civil War, right? And the Lieber Code was used for that. And when they took over the southern states, the military had to create a provisional entity to administer the laws, let's say, of Texas until the war is ended. But by setting up a temporary government in Texas, federally, they administered the laws of Texas, not the laws of Alabama, not the laws of so-and-so, but that's an internal matter. At the international level, you're supposed to administer the laws of the occupied country, no different than what they did with Iraq, with the creation of the Coalition Provisional Authority. They administered Iraqi law, not US law. Everything here is pretty much summed up in US Army Field Manual 27-10, which is constantly cited in international law articles regarding occupations. Section 358 states military occupation confers upon the invading force the means of exercising control for the period of occupation. It does not transfer the sovereignty to the occupant, but simply the authority or power to exercise some of the rights of sovereignty. Section 362, military government is the form of administration by which an occupying power exercises government authority of occupied territory. The necessity of such government arises from the failure or inability of the legitimate government to exercise its function on account of military occupation. So you can't think that you're in an occupied state and you can create your own government to have control if you're occupied, because occupation is really a matter of fact, and international law merely regulates that fact. Section 368, it is immaterial whether the government over an enemy's territory consists in a military or civil or mixed administration. Its character is the same and the source of its authority the same. It is a government imposed by force, and the legality of its acts is determined by the laws of war, Hague and Geneva Conventions, which is what is in the FM 27-10. So can you see what international law provides is an explanation of what Professor Chang was bringing up through federal statutes, which is limited to US territory? And Section 370, the occupant will continue in force the ordinary civil and criminal laws of the occupied territory, speaking to what were the laws of the country being occupied, not the laws of a foreign country being imposed, because it can, not only under international law, but also US law. So the federal and state of Hawaii governments would now be considered illegal regimes. That's a specific term used in international law. It's an illegal regime. Now this might be hard to swallow because we have family and friends that work in state of Hawaii government who didn't know. I was in Army National Guard. I didn't know that was illegal. You know, when I went on active, I didn't know I was in a foreign army. I didn't know. But now I do. And that kind of changes. The source of authority. See, that's the key. You got to look at the source of authority, not the claim. Yeah? The source of authority of the federal and state of Hawaii governments is the Congress. Because that's who created it here. Which has no authority beyond U.S. borders. In 1988, the U.S. Attorney General's Office of Legal Counsel, concluded it is unclear which constitutional authority Congress exercised when it acquired Hawaii by joint resolution. Did you know much of what Professor Chang shared with you was already fully discussed and elaborated in a legal opinion by the Office of Legal Counsel in 1988 by the Assistant Attorney General, Douglas Kamai, who had no interest in Hawaii, none at all, but Hawaii popped up because they were looking at how do you extend the territorial waters of the United States from 3 miles out to 12 miles. Because under the United Nations, they extended the territorial seas 9 additional miles. The question was, which entity within the US government can extend beyond the border, beyond the 3-mile limit to extend it an additional 9 miles? And what they did was they naturally got into examples of congressional assertion of sovereignty beyond the territorial limit, and here Hawaii gets popped up. So Hawaii was stumbled on, not researched, which is quite interesting, because I like that. That's an objective legal opinion, and not a skewed legal opinion, with a particular agenda in mind. The federal and state governments have no basis in law or fact, and are in direct violation of Hawaiian state sovereignty, international law, and the laws of occupation. Which bears in mind, how do you fix this problem? Now, when I did my doctoral dissertation, that's what affected my committee members, because they couldn't deny what was in my dissertation, as well as my larger articles. All they asked was, how do you fix the problem? Yeah, but you don't fix the problem by saying we're part of the United States. Because what you have is 121 years of violations. That's not a remedy. So restitution is the key. And restitution is taking the situation back to its legality. Now, once we do that, we're going back to 1893. How do we take up everything from 1893 till today? Because the University of Hawaii was created in 1907, or 1906 or 7? 1907. Which means I don't really have a PhD. And Professor Chang is not even an attorney. And John never was a governor. So we gotta fix this problem. See, I'm into fixing problems, but you need to understand the problem before you fix it. You might say we had the wrong diagnosis. Yeah? Somebody said we had the flu, just keep taking Tylenol. Then we found out we had a broken leg. And it never set right. And now we understand why we walk like that. You know how you fix that, right? You gotta reset it. Like, that's what we're getting into, and that's why education is very crucial. Now, the conduct of an illegal regime during occupation is limited and confined to the laws of occupation and to the principle of ex injuria jus non order, where unlawful acts cannot be the source of lawful rights, except for the registration of births, marriages, and deaths. That is recognized internationally, including by the United States. In a foreign country, if it's illegally occupied, they're not administering the laws of the occupied state, everything is void as far as its official acts, except for the registration of births, marriages, and deaths, because that goes to the benefit of the occupied territory. Everything else is void. The court stated that the principle of ex urnia non-order dictates that acts which are contrary to international law cannot become a source of legal acts for the wrongdoer. To grant recognition to illegal acts or situation will tend to perpetuate it and be beneficial to the state which has acted illegally. In other words, you can't get a legal fruit from an illegal tree. It's also part of what is called the rules of evidence. So here we're going to start this. We want to take this to the next level. Because what I'm sharing with you, pretty much generally understood, the basis of it, And we're going to test it. That's when 1995, Perfect Title came out. Boy, did that create a firestorm. Ooh, I didn't know that everybody was going to get angry. All we're going to show is you don't own your title. You don't own property because, real simple, notary. After 1893, that's an official act of insurgents. Because if you look at the deed in 1895, I bet you that notary, his name might be Lauren Thurston. According to the president, he's a traitor. And he wasn't granted amnesty because the government wasn't restored, so we have a defect in title there. But people have title insurance that they purchased to pay off the loan. But in order to activate the title insurance, you got to show the defect. But everybody thought we were crazy. In this article, Perfect Title considers any certificate transferred after 1893 to be invalid because it passed through individuals or institutions treasonous to the crown. Now when you read that, that makes sense now, right? Yeah, back in 1995, nobody had the information that I'm sharing with you now. And then the firestorm starts. Perfect Title has created chaos in Hawaii's real estate industry with its claims that current land titles are no good. The company reaches those conclusions using 19th century Hawaiian Kingdom law, which it says is still in effect, and by searching property records dating to the 1840s. Now that makes perfect sense. Not in 1995. Perfect Title Company gets raided. As part of a state criminal investigation, Honolulu police yesterday morning arrested Donald Lewis, David Keanu, and a company secretary for investigation of theft, racketeering, and tax evasion. Whoa. You guys know what RICO is, right? That's Al Capone stuff. It's called smear tactics. If you can't break it, you can't refute it, attack it. Now what I took from this, respect. That's actually respect. Because if this was frivolous, you wouldn't attack it. If it was frivolous, just move on. What I had to do was get into survival mode. It's like I was back in the military. The only gun or weapon I have is the computer. And lay low. Then we're indicted for attempted theft. Okay, let me give you some indication here, and I'm sure we have the law students here. Real estate is not the subject of larceny, because it's immovable. Unless you take money from that, you extort from that. Okay. Title searching is not theft. Perfect Title Company executives Donald Lewis and David Keanu and 2 other people indicted on theft charges this week and expect to be arrested within days if they don't turn themselves in first, the Attorney General's office said today. Wow. People still come to me today and say, hey, you're a convicted felon, huh? Really, by a court that doesn't exist, manufactured charges, which is actually a war crime called unfair trial. See, now the tables have turned. In fact, what went on in the court, everything there now becomes evidence of the war crime. Now what's interesting here is Donald James Weil, a British novelist, stated that when a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. I want to welcome you into the house of lunacy, because you are now lunatics if you say Hawaii's occupied and titles are defective. But again, I'm into fixing a problem, but you have to address it. And this was deliberately done for us to test the waters. So if you take the theory into practice. In the military, I want to fire the weapon before I say I'm going to use it. I want to test fire. This was a test fire. And you know what? It made things much more clear. Yeah? But we knew nobody understood what was going on. So what we needed to do here was not bring this upon myself personally as the bastion of sovereignty. No, because I'm not chasing sovereignty. I'm not part of a sovereignty movement. I'm not part of an independence movement. I'm part of the process of exercising that sovereignty that still exists within the framework of occupation. Now that's very different. So it's not a political aspiration, it's a reality check. And then how do you do it? What we needed to do was we needed to create some semblance of the state. well, to represent the state. And what we created was an acting government. An acting government to speak on behalf of the Hawaiian state at the international level and national levels. Acting. The word acting does not mean de jure or lawful. It is an exigency. Okay? I actually took this concept from in the Army. A private can become a lieutenant during time of war. Yeah, if everybody's killed in the chain of command, but he's called an acting lieutenant. He's not a real lieutenant. And when the properly commissioned officer comes, he gets relieved, he goes back down being a private. And that private is responsible for assuming the chain of command. It is not his choice, it is his duty to maintain the command structure. But you just might say we took it from private through lieutenant up to the general. Because everybody's gone, but what we have is an infrastructure called the Hawaiian Kingdom. And we're going to use that process to assume the chain of command to create some semblance of the Queen's government in 1893 without executive power, because that was yielded to the United States President, which they still have today. So we're just going to be a mouthpiece. That's all we're going to be, just a mouthpiece. Now this acting government is going to base its existence under what is called the legal doctrine of necessity, which is actually part of Commonwealth case law. And it became a topic of measurement regarding the prosecution of spite in the Fijian coup of not too long ago. And spite went beyond the limitation of necessity. That's why he was convicted for treason. But he was making the argument of necessity. So the doctrine states here that an imperative necessity must arise of the existence of exceptional circumstances not provided for in the Constitution for immediate action to be taken to protect or preserve some vital function of the state. There must be no other course of action reasonably available. Actions taken must be reasonably necessary in the interest of peace, order, and good government. It must not impair the just rights of citizens under the Constitution. And finally, it must not have the intention of consolidating power. Because if you try to consolidate power, that's treason, because you're self-proclaimed. So this legal doctrine of necessity is not only a justification, but it's also a double-edged sword. It can be used against us for treason. So the acting government's purpose as officers de facto is first to expose the prolonged and illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom by the United States, to ensure that the United States complies with the laws of occupation, which includes the Hague and Geneva Conventions, and to provide for an effective transition of the de jure government in accordance with international law. That's all it does. Okay? That's all it does. The strategy, phase one, verification of Hawaii as an independent state. That is so crucial. Verification. Because if we can't verify Hawaii as a state, we can't use international law, we can't use the legal doctrine of necessity, we can't use anything. Phase two, once we get verification, exposure of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. And then phase three, restoration. What I'm going to share with you, I'm going to kind of bring it to a close here, is how we were able to get verification. We got it at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which took place in a case, Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom, from 1999 to 2001. That's me over there on the left. Can't really see me, but I have the beard. I'm trying to look distinguished. When I got home, my wife said, "Shave that beard off." I'm going to show you a short 5-minute clip because you're going to see this in action, where you're going to realize that what the court was looking at was whether or not the plaintiff, who was trying to sue the acting government for not protecting them, if they could get past what is called the indispensable third-party rule. Okay, so this is sort of a tort case that's going on. We're the defendants. Now what we're going to do is, I told, as the lead agent, Nenia Parks, the attorney, we're going to help you sue us. Because we're going to use this platform to talk about Hawaii and present it to the whole world. Because I need something from this court. Right now it's implied we're in the court, we're independent, because it can only be a country to enter that court. I want it explicit, because I need to use what is used in international law called the presumption of continuity. Whereby if you show that you were a sovereign state, it is presumed you still are until refuted by overwhelming evidence. It's called it's a rebuttable presumption, but it's a presumption of continuity. That's how we're going to play it, similar to the presumption of innocence. And here's the change that you'll see. In summary, from 1840, the Hawaiian Kingdom possessed a constitutional government with elected and appointed officials and a complete system of civil and criminal laws to govern Hawaiian territory. On April 8, 1842, King Kamehameha III and Privy Council commissions 3 envoys to secure international recognition of Hawaiian independence. And these individuals are Timoteo Ha'alilio, William Richards, and Sir George Simpson. On December 19, 1842, Hawaiian envoys secured United States President Tyler's recognition of Hawaiian independence. November 28, 1843, the British government and the French government formally enter into a declaration recognizing Hawaiian independence. In our pleadings, we refer to that as the 1843 Anglo-Franco Proclamation. From that point, Hawaii has had its statehood recognized as being independent. As such, it began to enter into these treaties. Austria-Hungary, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Russia, Spain, and the United States of America. International recognition is evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom had diplomatic representatives as of 1893 from those countries, as far as consulates and embassies. Rather, what we find is that the United States has never expressed itself as an occupier. Who would? It would never admit to occupation. But yet, to admit to occupation is in a sense to admit to the continued existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state, which is really the crux of the matter, which is actually what is holding up, you might say, this issue to be resolved. Thus, the legal order, thus the reestablishment of the government, thus the relationship between its nationals.
I mean, to be slightly unkind, but thus the issue in rem. The point is that if the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, its existence is in rem. It's not in personam. The Hawaiian existence, the Hawaiian Kingdom doesn't exist solely in the opinion of Mr. Larson.
Right. But that existence should not be dependent upon an occupier, because you basically put the occupier on an equal footing with the Hawaiian Kingdom in its own territory. So really what needs to be addressed is what came before the occupation, whether the statehood or whether the legality or illegality of the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the illegality or legality of the United States as an occupier. Should the tribunal find it has jurisdiction, we are prepared to submit and offer a proof. We felt that this tribunal would offer some clarity so that for the first time we have a third party to present these type of merits that can be scrutinized by international law, rather than taking it before a United States tribunal, which could not rule on it to the detriment of itself. So in that sense, there is really no other way to address this issue. And the opportunity did arise because it was Mr. Larson who was adhering to Hawaiian Kingdom law. And if the United States was adhering to occupation, not whether they're illegal or illegal, but if they were adhering to the laws of occupation, we wouldn't be here right now. So what you can see is, you saw I was trying to shift, trying to get the court to verify Hawaii as a sovereign and independent state. Now I didn't know how that would come about, but after the hearing, we got word from the registry in the Netherlands. They knew exactly what I was asking for. And they gave it to us in an arbitral award. Paragraph 7.4, a perusal of the material discloses that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and various other states, including by exchanges of diplomatic or consular representatives and the conclusion of treaties. That now is dictum, and I could use that specifically for the presumption of continuity. Before that, it was just implied. Nobody wants to really say that word, that Hawaii is a state. So Hawaii recognized as an independent state, so presumably it still is, since international law provides for the rule of presumption, unless the United States can provide overwhelming evidence to rebut that. But a joint resolution is not rebuttable evidence to remove the independence. So Hawaii still is an independent state. 2 more slides. After the hearing, we were contacted by this ambassador from Rwanda, Dr. Bill Zagawa, at the court. He was there for a hearing at the International Court of Justice on genocide, a case dealing with Belgium and the Republic of Congo. He heard about Hawaii, looked across the hall, he went there, he grabbed all the paperwork because it was open to the public, sent it to his government, called the acting government for a meeting in Brussels, Belgium. So he met on December 12th. He said that after his government had reviewed the documents, it is clear Hawaii is occupied, and this cannot be tolerated because this is a gross violation of international law. His reasoning to us, he said Rwanda understands what happens when international law is violated, but the international community does not step in until it's too late. He was making specific reference to genocide. 800,000 Tutsis were massacred. And that was during President Clinton's administration. So he's prepared, and he was told us his government had advised him that they were prepared to report to the United Nations General Assembly the prolonged occupation. Now, that was a very big move that was offered. Now remember, we're lunatics. Our people back home have no clue what this status is. So we have to deny it. We have to go home and begin re-education. And we say we might call you later, but we got to go home, our work is cut out for us. And that is when, that very next month, January 2001, I entered the political science department. I'm going to major in international relations. And I'm going to start correcting the way history is being taught because I have an agenda. Yeah. What are they going to say? You weren't at the court? No, we were there. Well, in 2004, I graduated with a master's degree specializing in international relations. I began to teach classes and I published law articles on the Hawaiian Kingdom and its continuity, constantly seeking to vet. Let's see, come on, refute. Then in 2008, I was able to get my PhD and actually pick professors on my committee who couldn't agree with me. Because that's how you defend your dissertation. Because what I wanted, that's not an insult, that's called rigor. What I wanted was these professors to break it. Because they can break it, I'm not going to come out with it because I can't, that's fraud. They couldn't break it, all they could say was how do you fix the problem. Thus my last chapter in the dissertation is how do you right the wrong. And that righting the wrong basically has become a part of our strategic plan that we've been taking. And I have a bit more present things here to show, but I want to just stop right here. But I want to let you know that the latest event that has taken place is that Switzerland has met with an envoy from the acting government, and they are taking into consideration being a protecting power for Hawaii's occupation. And the role of a protecting power by the Geneva Convention is to ensure compliance to the laws of war and occupation so that war crimes cannot be committed. And what is an additional driving force for the Swiss? They have Swiss nationals here in Hawaii, and they're affected by this. So these are the kind of things that are currently going on, that are currently in negotiations, but I can only share what I can. I got to sterilize it, because if I tell you, I got to kill you. One thing I learned as a Hawaiian, when you tell people you're going to go fishing, don't tell people you're going fishing, otherwise the fish will hear and swim away. You tell people, I went fishing, here's my poke, and now you know what fish I got because you know where it came from. And it may not be ahi, could be nenue, yeah, could be ono, depending what we want. And that's the process that we're going through, and with that, mahalo.
As you know, Governor Waihe'e is the chair of the Hawaiian Royal Commission, and it's currently registering Native Hawaiians in order to form a modern Hawaiian government. He graduated from this law school, the Richardson School of Law, in 1976 in the first class. I'd like to acknowledge that this is the law school's 40th anniversary,
All right.
and that in addition to Governor Waihe'e, we also have Poka Lainui, who is also a graduate of the first class. He was a delegate to the 1978 Constitutional Convention, was instrumental in the establishment of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and of course he was the first Native Hawaiian governor of the state of Hawaii. So Governor Waihe'e.
Eagles. First of all, thank you very much. I wanted to maybe begin by telling you that this discussion tonight is really the brainchild or the result of people like Dr. Tsai and Bill Chang and others. I mean, it is our continuous evolution and recognition as a nation, as the existence of a nation. So, in a way, just like both individuals talked about their evolution to start with, maybe a little bit about mine, okay? Because I can remember a long time ago when I first came to, for example, came to the law school here, and we had, I think it was 6 members of our class that were Native Hawaiian. And then as we went along for a few months, one afternoon, one of us decided that the 6 of us should meet, but not on campus. Okay, and so we went off to somebody's house, and we all sat down and started talking about various things. And then this person leaned forward, and he said, "I want to talk about sovereignty and Hawaiian independence." And the rest of us looked at him, and there was Poka. and the important point about that was that this was back in 1973, and it was a whispering conversation. Today, we are talking here at the University of Hawaii Law School about our existence as a nation, and saying it openly, which is a period of development. You know, for me, one of the great moments was representing Walter's friends for the Kaho'olawi Ohana in a trial. And Professor Mackenzie, I'm not going to tell how I got involved. She got me drunk one night. But that's beside the point. The point is that we were probably the only lawyers that these defendants could afford. And we went and we worked hard. And we represented them, and we thought we presented the best cases that we could as lawyers. And we went into the courtroom, and we did all of that, and we thought we were doing really well, and we lost. And our clients went to jail. Some of them were on probation, you know, and it woke something in my mind that sometimes it's not all about the legality. Sometimes it's about who's got the power to do something. And I remember us all coming downstairs after being told that our friends were going to be sentenced by the federal court, and standing around, holding hands, pulling, singing, and being very angry. And I remember swearing to myself that I'm tired of losing. Tired of losing. This is, you know, we can have the best cases, the best things in the world, but you're only presenting it to a court that's not yours. So what influences events? What makes things happen? And really, when they asked me to be chairman of the Road Commission, these are the kinds of thoughts that were running through my mind. Because I have absolutely no doubt that Hawaii is in an illegal occupation. I have absolutely no doubt. I mean, you've got to be illiterate not to finally get to that point. I have absolutely no doubt that we were illegally overthrown. I have absolutely no doubt that this is all about force. You see, we hear about what the Queen went through. Queen Liliuokalani, when the guns were facing her palace. And we think, wow, you know, they were pointing guns. What we don't remember or recall was that 3 years prior to the United States military landing before Iolani Palace, they were involved in something called the Wounded Knee Massacre, where the United States, where there were 500 Native Americans, or 300 something Native Americans practicing their religion. And the United States troops approached them. Now these are unarmed civilians. Nobody knows who, but somebody fired a shot. And the same military that pointed their guns at the Iolani Palace killed every single man, woman, and child that was there in their worship ceremony. See? And it was so bad that 50 United States soldiers were also killed from friendly fire. See? This is what the Queen was facing. This is about power. So I have no doubt that we have now the ability, or we have the justification for seeking our own government, or the restoration. I have no doubt, by the way, that our nation exists. But the real question is, how do we influence those events? And Keanu and I have had this discussion. So I am looking at it from a political point of view. You know, this whole idea, we use words like sovereignty. One concept is this idea of cultural sovereignty. And it's true. We exist as a community and a people. We existed before any Westerner came here. We didn't have to be told who we were. We exercised dominion of the land. We did everything. And so the idea is, no matter what, our legacy as being the first people here is the idea that sovereignty is inherent in us. This is our island. It will always be our island. There's also this concept of political sovereignty, which is the ability of the governmental power to exercise authority without outside interference, which is what Kihano talked about, a nation state. And it requires something called recognition. Actually, it also existed when we were only a kingdom and everybody left us alone because the chiefs had to recognize each other, otherwise it would be just, you know, chaos. But internationally speaking, in 1843, we got accepted because we had the first federal recognition. And the first federal recognition that came to the Hawaiian Kingdom was a treaty. It was recognizing us as a sovereign power. What is recognition? In order to begin this, we have to think about a definition of recognition. What consists of recognition? What happens? What makes recognition? What is this word? And in order to just break through a million cases or whatever and get down to the essence, recognition really involves two things. It involves, first of all, an acknowledgement of nationhood. Yes, there is a Hawaiian kingdom. It exists. And then it takes the modification of behavior on the part of those that are doing the recognizing. It's not enough to just say they exist. They exist, and now we're going to have a relationship. We're going to do a treaty. We're going to do something. See, that's why the apology bill is not enough. I learned that the hard way. We thought they had a great success. We passed the apology bill. The United States said they were illegally in Hawaii, blah, 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 blah. And then 15 years later, the Supreme Court says, yeah, but that's just saying, I'm sorry, that's not paying a fine. You see, there was no modification of behavior. It needs to be pulled. Now, with regard to what we were trying to do with the Royal Commission is something called self-recognition. See, we're in the body of an occupation. What do you need to do to get started? We are a nation. Recognize ourselves. Acknowledge that we exist. Modify our behavior. How do we modify our behavior? We act like a nation. We begin to stand for things. We elect our own representatives. We do things. We act like a nation. Now, the beautiful thing about self-recognition is that there are no external constraints. Once you start to do this, you're constrained by the people who are willing to participate. This concept is not new. Probably the most effective form of self-recognition was Kalahuli at one point in time. Others are doing it right now. The challenge was, for us, as we looked at the commission and for me, can we do it with 100,000 people? Can we get 100,000 or 150,000 people to get together and to start to act like a nation and a government? You see? That was the whole, that's the idea. Now, when you get past self-recognition, what do you do? Again, political recognition. That's the next step, the external. What do we do with external people? First thing, acknowledgement that our nation exists and establish government-to-government relationships, whatever they are. Right now, we have a number of things going on. You got Act 195. The state passes this. They're not the greatest law in the world. The only good thing about it is that it gave us an opportunity to play with.
State of nowhere.
All right? So you got Act 195. The state says, yes, there's a nation. All right, thank you. You got the Hawaiian laws. You got the federal government, 200 laws saying all kinds of things, despite all the illegal acts, but they exist as a nation. Yeah, and an apology bill. You got on the international level, Dr. Kehano's work, among others, Dr. Sai's work, where, you know, the important thing is not so much winning an arbitration, it is the fact that they're even considering it. So on the international level, you have precedent for the recognition of the existence of a Hawaiian nation. That's one half of complete political recognition. What we need to do, and what this initiative was attempting to do, was establish the government so that we can have government-to-government relationships. So what is going to be, once the state of Hawaii says, I recognize you as Kanaka Maoli, what does that mean? I knew that before this. I also know everything else. But what does that mean? What does that mean to stolen lands? What does that mean to our people? The same thing with the United States. You pass an apology resolution. What does that mean? How do we interact with each other? What is the next step? The same thing on the national level. Now, I'm going to get through this. In the process of establishing these relationships, we have an agenda. We have certain considerations. The first consideration is what's going to be the structure of any self-recognized government. The second is what is going to be the relationship of this self-recognized government to any of these other institutions. And the third is the welfare of our people. How do we mold those people willing to participate in this kind of an expression into a community, into a force? How is it possible for us to take X number of 100,000 people on a Hawaiian issue and they all act as a nation? Whatever it is. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the priority and the focus is always on structure and relationships, and where it ought to really be is on the welfare of the people. army. Because that's our determination. How does this make life better? How does this make life better for all of us? That's the guiding light. That's what this is an attempt to do. You see, I believe that in reality we are facing the same kind of challenges that the Queen faced, that everybody faced in their time. We have to deal with this rogue United States. We have to deal with it just like they did. And it's not only a question of reading about what they did, it's a question of developing the leadership to respond to the challenges and the realities that they face as they are being morphed into today. So, Kanai Oluwalu is an attempt to try and fulfill this kind of an objective. Thank you very much.
Start. There's a gentleman in the back of the room who's had his hand up. Sir,
I like you. You're fun to talk to. And I could have sworn it was April 1st today when I heard you talk. Because it's a joke and a half. It's absolute hypocrisy. You can't, and we're reliving what happened with the Queen. Exactly. You're the Committee of Unkind. You're no better than the Committee of Safety. You represent them. You're selling our people down the river. How can you look at us with a straight face? I know you're nervous, but
I'm not nervous, believe me.
Okay, no. But it's just, it pisses the hell out of me. I shouldn't have eaten earlier because they should have passed that bag around to vomit. That's too much to handle.
Do you have a question to ask?
I want to make a statement. He's selling our people down the river. He's committing treason.
I'm asking, thank you for your opinion, but at this point,
Keanu and Williamson Chang are speaking the truth. How can you go there and twist it as an attorney? But that's what attorneys are for. They twist the truth. I rest my case.
Do you want to respond? Yeah. Does anyone have a question for the governor? Thank you.
Not only for the governor.
Well,
Hello,
here's
Mike
a question right here.
Mahalo nui for sharing all your information. My name is Z. I have a question that maybe anyone here can answer. As for Kana'i Oluwalu, it seems like it's an attempt to consolidate power, and Dr. Sai said, he made mention that consolidation of power could be treasonous, is treasonous. If any of you can comment on that.
Well, one thing that we have to keep in mind, okay, is that a lot of us didn't know this information. You know, that's key. So we cannot act like we knew it all along. I didn't know it until I retired as a captain, in 1994. That's what prompted me to make that decision. Now, somebody could have said, I'm in the United States Army, I'm part of the occupation, that's treason. Well, when you start to get into crimes, you get into intent, elements, those kind of things. So those are important issues, especially with criminal aspects. You not only have crimes under Hawaiian law, which is treason, but you also have crimes under international law in the FM 27-10 and Geneva and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's what I would like tonight to have been and to be is this is information that is coming out. Yeah? And we're all at different stages. Because John is a friend of mine, okay? But John has his views based upon his knowledge, which isn't to turn it off where I can't talk to him, because we do talk, but we exchange now. So I look at John as actually, you know, we can kuka and not bash each other. Because the one thing I didn't want to do is, I could be put in John's place back in 1993 when I was a battery commander for 105 howitzers. How am I going to defend that one? I didn't know. But I'm just saying it takes different levels. So I'm very careful to throw the criminal aspects out, and I want to make sure that people has been apprised, because one of the elements under war crimes provided by the Rome Statute in the International Criminal Court is that They had to have known what was going on, and then they moved. Yeah. Now, to what degree they moved after they knew, I don't want to play prosecutor. I just want to make it as if, yeah, I didn't know. My auntie didn't know. Because once I start throwing that sword around, which is double-edged, I got my cousin right next to me, might be doing the same thing. You see what I'm saying? That's why what's amazing about this occupation is that the occupier and the occupied have become blurred. Before it was black and white. Our kupuna knew who the military was when they came in, because you know why? They spoke another language. Today, we all speak English. We serve in the military. It's like the civilians took over, the military retreated to the back. So here at the university, it's important to keep it academic. It's important to take it to the level of pushing the envelope. Very, very profound ramifications, because I can tell you it's already happening in court where judges are being reported for war crimes. But they weren't just being reported, they've been apprised of the information, because what's happening is the elements are being fulfilled before it takes off. That's why people have to be very careful what's going on. So, Z, I know I didn't answer it fully, but around the boat.
I'm going to be short.
Who else wants to talk? Okay, other questions?
Oh, I'm going to be short. Okay. In fact, I'm going to tell a joke. There was this crowd, and there was this woman, and all of them were stoning the woman, and it was very unfair. It's a biblical story. And this man says, "Let he without sin cast the first stone." And so this woman from the back comes with this, picks up this boulder and moves, and she kind of carries the boulder, and then he throws it on the woman, killing her. And the man says, "Mother, sometimes you make me so mad." The point of the story is, what Keanu was making is, we're in this both together in terms of a journey of knowledge.
Yep.
And when I talk about the state of emergency being the United States, how has it been able to govern us for 100 years without putting guns at our head? It's us. We're the problems. The law school is the problem. Why? Because judges and lawyers have a duty of candor and truth. Judges on their own have to tell the courts, tell the attorneys, there's no jurisdiction. It's a duty of zealous representation for attorneys to present the best defense. And isn't the best defense that there's no jurisdiction? So the attorneys are involved, the judges are involved. But not only that, it's not just Hawaiians who are being oppressed by this lack of jurisdiction. It's everybody in the whole Hawaiian Islands. And not only that, going back to the Kue petitions, they were true. They knew what was right. They knew what they wanted. They wanted to stop the Treaty of Annexation. And they did. How? Because they got the American people against the Treaty of Annexation. It was not the Hawaiians who didn't sign the Treaty of Annexation. It was the Americans who didn't sign the Treaty of Annexation, because the American people were against annexation. They knew it was wrong. It was a few individuals like McKinley, John Foster Dulles, William Rufus Day, who are the criminals. We should bond with the American people who had their Constitution manhandled and mangled by the occupation and taking of Hawaii. In other words, it's a lot larger in terms of responsibility. We're all at different stages. That's why I don't think it's fair to be critical of the governor. He was there 30 years ago.
This is in the wrong state of mind.
Okay.
Oh, okay, all right. I don't think so, by the way, so we can talk later.
You know, I'm sitting here listening to the discussion, and it reminds me of going back to the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. There are certain stages of this process of decolonization. I know Keanu takes offense to the term decolonization, but I will use it. The first is a stage of recovery and rediscovery, which seems like exactly what we're going through, rediscovering that history, understanding what has gone on. And there's an element of the second stage, the mourning phase, the anger, the bitterness that I can hear it here, and we've heard it back in the 70s and the 80s with very bitter discussions, especially at the University of Hawaii. The third and the fourth stage, the third stage being the dreaming stage, and the fourth stage being the formation to build consensus, is what, John, you are addressing and asking that other question, not to build a nation based on historical injustices, but how do we build a nation based on the best future Hawaii can have? And what you are trying to do is build a grouping or a process in which 100,000 people can gather together, hold a convention, and start discussing that next stage before we hit the fifth stage, the execution stage. My question is, though, that in 1996 we had an election of delegates to a convention. And in that case, we didn't take a roll, but we said any poe Hawaii, from any place in the world, irrespective of citizenship, irrespective of civil rights being taken away as a result of conviction or whatever it is, we opened the list wide. And we did that, and we elected 79 delegates to sit in a convention. The state has refused, along with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, to continue the funding of that convention, which was a result of a public election process. And so my question is, why should we support a Kana'i Oluwalu, which is a substitution for what already exists, but has never been allowed to complete its work, so that we can get to the next step and pose the two options of integration or independence and let the people decide. Thank you.
Right. And as you know, I'm very familiar with that history. Right?
You appointed us.
Yeah. And actually, I was, that was, I think the reason, well, first of all, to answer your question, the specific question, is that in those days we had something called the Office of Hawaiian Affairs voting list, which was that we had a record of people who were all participating as Native Hawaiians in the process. And frankly, if we still had that list, I don't know why we would need the roll today. And as you know, at the very moment, well then, you know, one thing is that, I hate to say it this way, but when I left office, nobody thought that the crazy ideas that we had should be funded, right? I mean, that's why you should never trust government. Anyway, because they changed opinion. But anyway, what happened was when the Ha Convention came out with their products, and it was supposed to go out for a referendum. It was the exact same year that the United States Supreme Court invalidated the OHA voting list. And so there was no body to submit the work product to. Obviously, people took advantage of that fact because some people just didn't want that thing submitted. So, period. So we disappeared. That disappeared. And essentially, what I personally am hoping is that we actually pick up where we left off. I don't think we should have a convention that starts like brand new. You know, I mean, my personal view, which I've been trying to get OHA to abide to, is that they should really pick up exactly where the last convention left off. I mean, this is just the continuation of the same thing.
So we have three more. Jordan, and then the Seer Man, and then we'll end with you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming for the panel. I just had a question. It's somewhat about Kana'i Oluwalu, but I think any of you guys could answer. I just wondering, we keep saying that the government coming out of Kana'i Oluwalu can be whatever we want it to be, the structure of it. And I just wonder how that's possible, given the fact that it's a state agency doing it, and how could that fund or support a movement to remove a state from the union? And given the language from the act that says that the state supports federal recognition, I just wonder where we get that idea that we could do whatever we want. And I would like the opinion of some of the of County too about whether you think a result from Kana'i Oluwalu would preclude your arguments as well internationally.
Well, first of all, you know, I think that the mere fact that something may have originated with the state doesn't negate the positive thing that can be done from it by itself. In other words, what I'm saying is that you wouldn't, for example, you wouldn't like stop protecting the iwi because you have to use a state law to do it, all right? So, Kanai Oluwalu, Act 195 is an opportunity for Hawaiians to do something that would not be available otherwise. That's the way I look at it. Now, once you form the convention itself is separate from the state. It's actually where OHA should have been by now, which is completely disconnected. Okay. At that moment in time, the state regulations, state whatever, with regard to how the convention ought to do itself, is not applicable. The delegates themselves have to decide that issue. Now, does that mean that the illegal power, the state's power, disappears? No, I mean, if you get a traffic ticket, you're still going to have to pay the fine, unless you pay the penalty. But that doesn't, they don't control what the product that you bring out of the convention. And what people forget is that the product that came out of the HA convention was the fact that we should be independent. People forget that what led to the HA convention was a referendum from Native Hawaiians passed 4-1, which said that there ought to be a convention put together for us to discuss these issues and go forward. It was that convention, that effort, that was shortchanged by the state government when, at the very critical moment, when they defunded the whole thing and then they wouldn't allow for any money to take it out to referendum. In a sense, you're trying to get back to that moment and then go from there.
When you look at this whole issue that we're going through, we have to call it what it is. It's an extension of Americanization.
Yes.
It is. It's an extension of Americanization. It's nothing new. No. So it started in 1906. We've been led to believe something that's not true. We're now operating on the mindset that we can do certain things when in fact it really has no consequence. It won't. It's, well, let me explain. 1959, everybody voted. How many people voted? 94%. 94% vote, included natives. They didn't do anything. Hawaii's still an occupied state, and if anything, that vote is an extension of an illegality that is considered Americanization. Now we tend to think, well, Native Hawaiians can do it now. But the Native Hawaiians are not the sole, you might say, beneficiaries of being an independent state. You also have foreign nationals that are living here, and according to the treaties with the Hawaiian Kingdom, they're actually protected under that treaty. That's what Switzerland sees. See, we got to keep in mind that we not only were an independent state, we still are an independent state, but we're occupied. To think that we can choose to be independent doesn't make sense. You don't choose to become independent again. You are. It's the presumption of continuity, but we need to utilize international law to understand this. Right now, nobody's talking international law. In particular, we're supposed to be talking international humanitarian law, which deals with the civilian population and the process by which rights are protected during occupation. See, nobody's talking about international humanitarian law or the law of occupation or the Geneva or Hague Convention, because we don't know. I had to learn that. That's part of that's my expertise. But when I listen to everybody here, all I hear is Act 195. Well, that's a state enactment, which is an illegal regime limited to U.S. territory. See, we're right back to that no treaty. So the process by which to address this and to resolve the problem that we have, knowing and keeping in mind we've been Americanized. We always have to keep in mind first we're Americanized, and that's a check on us. We need to understand international law to just understand what's going on. Not to say I know international law because I'm going to make this guy do this. No, I'm not saying that. Power is the ability to get somebody to do something they wouldn't normally do. I'm not into conventional power because we don't have it, military, political, economic. We don't. What I got is leverage. How do I create leverage and get John to do something he wouldn't normally do, and he's a Swiss government? I need to find a vested interest in the Swiss government, maybe John, where he has to. But I'm not going to start calling names because you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody. I need to find a way to talk. So I actually documented a term that I made up. See, political scientists can make up words and start to use it in larger articles. And I actually call this term, see, Melanie knows, you can make up words. It's called reverse power relation differential. And it was published. And it means political jujitsu. To take the power and to twist it. That's called lua. So if we're going to play Hawaiian, start thinking Hawaiian. And the one thing that I would highly suggest to everyone here, not to think of what we think we should do, I think we should go back and ask ourselves, what would somebody who knew who they were, who knew the country instead of us just realizing the country, like Joseph Navahi, James Kaulia, David Kalaukalani, not just the Queen, there were many nationals, including Paul Newman. Paul Newman's Haole, but he's Hawaiian, Hawaiian subject. What would they do given our situation? Because they knew who they were, they knew what the laws were, and Navahi was very fluent in international law. In fact, he was, for a while, Minister of Foreign Affairs. See, these things we cannot forget. That's the key. Because remember, we are who we were. Let's go back to who we were to understand how we do certain things. Instead of here trying to argue with each other, and we've all been Americanized, and who is louder than the other guy. And what does it serve? Nothing. So that's the key, because we got to keep that in mind.
So I think this question may have already been answered, but I'm wondering who would sovereignty serve? Like, is it for the people of Hawaii or for Hawaiians? Like, I guess I really don't know who would be served by sovereignty.
I'll take a stab at that. If we had a Hawaiian nation, people who were not citizens would be aliens, but they would be protected by the constitutional rights of the nation.
No, exactly, because within a country, see, sovereignty is supreme authority over the territory. Now, how you exercise that authority over that territory will determine geopolitically where you're at. So if I'm in Saudi Arabia, then that's a sovereignty authority, and I'm not Saudi, but I'm an alien in Riyadh. It might be subject to a few issues of religious law, a bit of absolutism, and so forth. So it depends where you're at. But if you look at the Hawaiian Kingdom, it had adopted the separation of powers doctrine in 1864, which is the cornerstone of constitutional law. Nobody knows that. Queen Lili'uokalani was the chief executive, not an absolute monarch. So when we look at the country, how was the country then and who benefited? Well, as Williamson stated, everybody. But there's a difference between what is called political rights and civil rights. Aliens have civil rights, okay, but not political rights. People who are Hawaiian subjects, irrespective of race, color, creed, have both political and civil rights. And if the alien wishes to have political rights, he gets naturalized. You know, but all these answers to these questions are actually in the Kingdom era. You actually got them in the court cases, the laws. It's amazing what you have there. We think today that was a banana republic and we need to create something different. No. I remember one person, I'm not going to point him out, but he knows. One of the students of mine thought that the position was, and I'm going to say it in such a way that it may not have happened in that way. Okay? Donovan. The point that came up in class, in the graduate class, was the United States controlled the Hawaiian Kingdom. Why we got to learn all this stuff? Because we're just learning how they controlled the mahele, they forced the Constitution on the king. These are all urban legends. Yeah, but they said, but the understanding is the United States controlled the Hawaiian Kingdom. Okay, so my point was, you know, that springs a good question for research. If the United States controlled the Hawaiian Kingdom, then why did they have to overthrow it in 1893? So you don't overthrow something you're in control of. Now you might be in control, and you were in control after the overthrow, but not before. And Donovan, I'm gonna pull him out, I'm on his doctoral committee. He did his research, and he covered the land issue, the mahele. Very different than how everybody's looking at it today, but he saw it through and interpreting it through the law, through the records, through the facts, as well as the politics. And it was completely different how people are understanding it today, but he's using original source documents. And he was awarded the best master's thesis in the Pacific Rim. Wow. And now, he's going for his PhD, and he's in the PhD program, and I'm honored to be on his committee. But I'm gonna push it, But the point I wanna finish off with is, you gotta make sure you ask the right questions. Like Thomas Pynchon said in Over the Rainbow, he said, if you get people to ask the wrong questions, you don't have to answer them. So the key is asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, you're talking about sovereignty, and you're talking about the Hawaiian state. That was a nation that was open to all of its nationals, which included both Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians. But I think in terms of the resurgence of the issue of sovereignty, the people who have the most attachment to it in today's society are the first people in these islands, Native Hawaiians. They're the people that have the most attachment to that concept and would like to bring it back again. And in a sense, they are the originator of the sovereignty even for the nation state, because if they weren't here organizing and establishing itself and welcoming additional people, they would have been neither. So, yes, to that extent, it has become a Native Hawaiian issue. Now, I think though, for me personally, the whole discussion of sovereignty actually transcends all of that. And that is that I think that the most cutting issue of ultimately, and this is going to sound controversial, but ultimately, it's not all the legal theories, it's not even our history. What should drive, at least for me, is the cultural concept that we are seeking sovereignty because it is good for our people, everybody, including Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians alone. I mean, I believe that a Hawaiian point of view on how we govern these islands is precisely what is needed if these islands are going to survive beyond this century. And that is the motivation for us to seek self-governance, to seek independence, to seek whatever, and the restoration of sovereignty. Now that's for me on a personal level. But if you're looking at it from a, you know, like an academic or a legal level, yeah, it's the relationship between the state.
By the way, you know, this is all confusion, John. We know that, and I'm knowing very well. Again, you're your business law partner, Mr. Proto, yeah?
Yeah.
The rights of my people take precedence. This is my part of the world. This is my point of origin. This is my pico. Exactly like what the petitions were all about. We abided by their rules, and we won for our benefit as a homogeneous society and as a society that was inclusive of others that were possibly different in packaging. But their na'au was for us, this pico. They continued to complement the blessings of this specific spot in the universe. That needs to be mindful whenever talking about Hawaii today. It's all confusion now. So it's just always understand, I refuse to allow our people to continue to be statistics in their system. The most overweight, the most diabetic, most on drugs and alcohol, the most in prison. Our answer is to come back home to our kumulipo and haloa. It's that simple. No kuka involved. It continues to be kukai kukai. Nice and easy. You're either for Hawai'i or you're part of the Hawai'i that is today. So be very mindful of that. There's no discussion. You're either of truth and integrity of the koko of this piko. If you wish to participate, e komo mai. Continue to be complimenting the blessings of what really is magnificent about Hawaii. Not deteriorating it and rotting it. Again, it just becomes a cancer. I mean, you folks are living with cancer, living with another way to have another Band-Aid to remedy and be that American. Aole, wean yourself from that shit. Come back to our heaven, not their heava end.
Okay, I know that there are many more questions, but we do have to end the night. And actually, so what I'm going to do is promise that we will have these three gentlemen back sometime in the next. Did you know this?
She used to have to get me drunk before.
In the next 3 months to continue this discussion. So hold me to my word.
This is a song that calls all of our people out from all of the islands. It is an invitation. E kono la, it is an invitation to all to come together and to declare your loyalty to the kingdom and to the queen.